The International Association of Female Artists is an organization that provides a forum for women globally and gives voice to artists of all media. Women artists have been the pollinators of culture and community for centuries, and often are not seen or valued in visible ways in the art world. We hope that this global opportunity creates a new precedent for allowing access to those who are often overlooked in countries around the world. We welcome you to The Time Is Now, Conversations with Artists, which focuses on individual member artists showcasing their work. This series is committed to showcasing our members' work and their voice with the participation of selected panelists who may offer questions and commentary after the presentation. Now I will turn over the program to Rosalie Ultan, who will introduce our moderator, Ellen Schillace. Thank you again for your participation this morning.
Thank you, Laurel, for that introduction and for acquainting the community with the organization that is being represented here. I'm delighted to be part of this and to introduce Ellen Schillace, who is Vice President of the International Association of Female Artists. And prior to that, she was President of the Minnesota Women's Caucus for the Arts, as well as past board member of WARM, which is another organization for promoting women in the arts as well. Ellen's background is very varied, coming from a degree in English and psychology. She has worked as a social worker, and she is a creative artist who has done numerous exhibitions around the country, as well as participate in panels and further discussions on the arts in community as an activist. So her background brings a great deal of support to the organization, and we are delighted to have her as well as a creative artist and one who has curated a major show on women and money. So there we have the intersection of all of the qualities that she brings to the organization. Thank you, Ellen. I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you for your generous words. I am really excited today because the first thing that I did was I looked up Anne Ryerson's background, and on her website, she has her title of her portfolio is Liminal Realities and Enigmatic Constructs. And that was very exciting to me because it talks about occupying a space on both sides of the boundaries, which is something that we are, as artists do. And we are living in that construct right now. And enigmatic constructs means something mysterious. So the conversation today should be very interesting. The main statement that she makes that I think is very interesting is this, these are her words: the conceptual background of this work is inspired by intersecting interests in cosmology, philosophy, myth, mysticism, and symbolism. These concepts and narratives share themes that involve non-ordinary experience. So I'm very excited to hear about Anne today. But before we get to that, I'm going to introduce the panelists that we have that are a part of this, this group today. And I'll start with Lynette. Lynette is a multimedia, Lynette Black is a multimedia artist who attended MFA program at the University of Iowa and has a lengthy career in global marketing. She's a co-op member of High Point Center for Printmaking and actively exhibits locally and nationally, receiving a multitude of awards. Her curatorial leadership has been in support of social and environmental justice, immigrants, emerging artists of all ages, and artists of color, including Indigenous artists. She is a long-term member of the Women's Caucus for Art and is currently, actually, she was a past president also. She is currently a member of Art to Change the World and VP and board member of International Association of Female Artists. Then we have Meng Tang, who is currently works as a media artist, curator, and filmmaker. She earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Beijing Film Academy, a master's degree in media art from New York University, an MFA in new media from the University of Minnesota in 2010. She's exhibited internationally, including at the Kobe Biennale in Japan, the Chengdu Biennale in China, Hangzhou. I might not be pronouncing these correctly, International Photography Festival in China. And she has curated a number of international art exhibitions on a range of subjects, always with a political undercurrent. She's been featured in a lengthy article in Rain Taxi magazine. The Minnesota Monthly named her an artist to watch. She is basically, I would say, the founding grounding element for International Association of Female Artists and is obviously on the board and a vice president. So I'm going to go on to Laurel Gorman, who is a visual artist and curator and art consultant. She was a professor of art and gallery director at St. Catherine's University for 10 years. And during that time, she invited many artists from the WARM program, and it was a very celebratory time for women's artists in the Twin Cities during that time. Her early work at the Minnesota Museum of Art, I guess, and her curatorial director experience in the art department at St. Kate's led to 15 years as an art consultant for corporate art collection and a national exhibition program. This position brought her to the world of publication of design of art books and catalogs for corporate and museum publications. So her consulting experience includes both corporate and private collections, and she's currently involved and a member of the International Association of Female Artists as operations director and Second Wave Artists, the Monday Art Critique Artists, and Landmarkers Drawing Co-op. Rosalie has a unique experience on our panel today of being a poet, an art historian, and she has degrees from Dickinson College with honors, American University, University of Minnesota PhD program, graduate fellow, and the Smithsonian Institution. So she brings a rich array of talents and gifts and perspective to our panel today. And I'm honored to have her on this panel. She has taught on the faculties of Hamline University, the University of Minnesota, where she developed graduate seminars on the history of art with special focus on the intersection or interdisciplinary approach to the study on art and the environment for over 25 years. She is currently a consultant for the American Siberian Education Foundation, where she's developed an exhibition that is on view virtually from the Integral Museum in Novosibirsk. And this exhibition is an outgrowth of two major shows at the University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment: Sustainable Acts, Mother Earth's Embrace, and Tales of Environmental Turbulence, the Common Trail of Art and Science, which were awarded special grants in 2013 and 2016. And I really enjoy having her here because of also Anne Rynearson's work is definitely a commentary on the environment and her relationship to the environment. I am really pleased to have her with us today. So I'm going to go on now to introduce our guest, who is our main person today, our guest artist, and we're going to look at her work. Anne Rynearson. Anne Rynearson has been doing art, I think, her whole entire life, but she has an MFA from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a BFA from Minnesota State University in Mankato. She has received numerous grants, the Artist Initiative Grant from Minnesota State Arts Board, a travel and study grant from the Jerome Foundation, Minnesota, New York Residency, the Print Association in Lage, I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly again, Rhine, Germany. She's also received an Artist Initiative Grant, another Artist Initiative Grant from the State Arts Board. She's had solo exhibitions and many juried exhibitions around the country. She currently has a show at Odetta Gallery in New York City. It's called Refresh, but she's had numerous participations in that gallery over the past number of years, 2021, 2020, 2020. She's also participated in the National Association of Women's Artists in New York and in the Phipps Center for the Arts at Hudson and Bloomington Gallery, and in the Print Association in Rhine, Germany. She has just numerous shows since 2000 that are too numerous to even mention, but she has some public collections at Hamline University in Rhine, Germany, Minot State University in North Dakota, the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and the Administration Center in Minnesota State, at Minnesota State University in Mankato. She is member of Odetta Gallery, SHIM Artist Network, the Women's Caucus for Art in New York, the International Association of Female Artists, and Now Be Here Art, which is an online representation for artists. She's been an instructor at the Northfield Arts Guild in Northfield, Minnesota. She's been a guest artist at Sofler Gallery in St. Paul. She has also been done artist talks at the Greenberg Gallery, Inez Greenberg Gallery in Bloomington, and at Hamline University in St. Paul, and also a teaching assistant at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. All I can say is that quite an impressive resume, what I would call as a young artist. And I am really excited to introduce and honored to introduce Anne. So I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for everybody for participating. It's quite an honor to be a part of this group. I feel like a newbie with all of these accomplished human beings. And so it's really great to be a part of this. And thank you very much for selecting me to show my work today. It's an honor. So I will go ahead and share my screen and we can begin the slideshow. So I can just begin with this screen I just created as a sort of a cover page, as the title is based on this current series that I'm working with called Liminal Realities and Enigmatic Constructs. I came to this idea after a couple of years of working on a previous series, which I will go through the images and kind of tell you the evolution of how I've gotten to this point. But in terms of just a basic introduction of myself, as Ellen pointed out, my undergraduate work was at that time it was called Mankato State University. It's now Minnesota State University in Mankato, where I studied painting and drawing. And then I went on to graduate school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, where I continued my work in painting. And when I was an undergraduate, I was very interested in representational work. I loved drawing from life, drawing from the model, and working from observation. I gradually sort of moved into areas of abstraction and became really interested in pattern painting, optical art, which you can sort of see I'm sort of coming back to a lot in work now. It's funny how things come around again that you were thinking about maybe when you were younger. But my work definitely has this kind of mix of abstraction with some representational elements in it. And I like that sort of play and that relationship between those two things and that sort of tension and the challenge of creating compositions intuitively. And we can talk about that as I go along. I'll go to the next slide. So this piece that's called Skunk Hollow was one of the first pieces that I created in a series that began 2014, 2015, with the idea of talking about climate change, the environment, and my relationship with nature, which goes kind of a deep sort of emotional connection, experiential connection that goes back to my childhood, really. I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota and was alone a lot of the time in the countryside playing, and just really had a really deep connection with that place and that setting. And you know, you develop sort of an idea of what it's like to live in that environment as opposed to an urban environment. And this series was also going into the idea of climate changing the environment in the sense that I felt like I could actually see changes happening to this place that I grew up in sort of a somewhat negative way, you know, as we see now quite evidently all over the planet, of how our local environments are changing because of climate change. And I found that to be kind of disturbing. And also I think because I felt like people weren't really paying attention, and it was easy just to kind of say, well, we got to continue to do what we've been doing because of the economy or whatever other reasons. And we don't want to change our ways, especially where I'm from is very farming country. And so tends to be kind of conservative. And so people didn't really want to acknowledge that these things were happening, and they were actually going to probably affect your lifestyle and your way of life that people have become accustomed to. But anyway, so these compositions, I created a series of paintings and some prints and drawings. What I'm showing you today is, I believe for the most part, the paintings. I think there's a print in there as well that I created. But the paintings, I intended on creating really large scale work in acrylic. I used to use oil exclusively when I was a student, but then I decided to switch to acrylic because I really loved the idea of layering quickly with paint, and acrylic had a really obviously fast drying time. And so I could make these really opaque layers combined with transparent layers. And I thought that was really an interesting process to try. And I really wanted to do it on a large scale. I wanted to make sort of very dramatic paintings that you couldn't escape from. They were based on ideas of landscape, but they were meant to be very abstract, fragmented, sort of getting away in a sense of that idea of beauty of the landscape, the romantic view of the landscape. I wanted something that felt a little jarring, a little dissident. So one of the things I did with these paintings is I incorporated Photoshop with photographs that I took of the actual place where I grew up, of the creek, the fields, different, natural elements. And I went back to Photoshop and I played around with the images, altered them, and then I would go and project those images onto my bare canvases that were primed, and then draw out selected areas of the forms from the photographs, paint them in, go back and apply other layers on top, and sort of bring things back and forth until I felt like I had achieved something that felt interesting with the work. And so this piece was one of the first pieces that I did. Skunk Hollow, the name refers to an actual place on the farm that's this kind of mysterious little creek area that ran by my parents' place. And it always happened to be, of course, one of the most pretty places, but also the place where people would come to dump their garbage, that would come out to the country and throw away their garbage, So I've always felt like that was really disturbing, and there's a story there of some kind. And so I wanted to make a painting about that. The next piece, this is also a part of that series, which I called Altscape. Altscape sort of came about the idea of scape from landscape. The word alt happened because I was thinking of alternative landscapes. It also was at the time when, what's her name? Kellyanne Conway from the Trump administration was talking about alternative facts. And I sort of felt like, oh, this feels like these are alternative facts.
Yes.
In a way about the environment, we've sort of believed these ideas that maybe they aren't really true.
Right.
So that's kind of where that title came from for the series. This piece, Savages, was sort of based on the idea a little bit about the cultural history of the area where I was from. Of course, as European Americans, the farmers, basically the land was taken away from the Native Americans, as we know that history, by the government, and sold to settlers that came in. And just sort of that kind of referencing that history, but also the idea of what a savage, the idea of what is a savage. I feel like, even to this day, people still tell these stories of sort of like us against them kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I felt very kind of disturbed by that. And I was like, well, your behavior is it's much more of a savage, and just sort of making kind of a comment about that. That was always very irritating to me growing up and not really understanding that history too. As a kid, I was never taught about Native American history in school, even though it was all around us. All of the farmers would collect artifacts that they would find from the fields and keep them in their own personal collections. Some of them, like in the town where I'm from, they have a little museum there that they actually created where farmers could donate their collections, quote unquote, and they put the farmer's name on it, even though it's still really disconnected from the actual people who created these objects. So I don't know. There's so much complexity there, but I just wanted to create a piece that felt really chaotic, and it sort of started as a red, white, and blue painting, sort of like the American flag colors, but it ended up having obviously other things in there and other shapes. So it was I felt like it was, very gestural in a way. I wanted it to feel very active, like something was happening, but it's not really a direct statement. Next piece, this is also from that series called Third Nature. It's a triptych. So I worked on 3 different panels in conjunction with each other that I also used the technique with projecting imagery from photographs. This was largely based on reflections in the little creek that ran by the farm that I altered, painted in, and then I applied a grid over the top that I painted in with metallic gold paints. So it was kind of a very intricate piece. It may be difficult to see in this photo of the detail of the grid, but I painted every little square in. So it took me a while to do this piece, but the idea of third nature goes back to this old, I think it was based in Italy. I'm trying to remember the art history now, or landscape design history, which I'm also really interested in. But it talks about the idea of where nature and man-made landscapes sort of meet and come together. And it's at that point in which people begin to alter the landscape for their own needs. And so, you know, the history of landscape design, you know, like during the, I think it was what, the 1700s or so, into 1800s with Capability Brown in England, where he created this sort of imitation of nature, of the view, but it was all very artificial and created, you know, for the purpose of creating a specific view. And so I was just thinking about that idea of how we use nature for our own ends and how we try to alter it in some ways to create the view that we want. Next slide. Pearls, another one from that series, another large painting. Again, just playing around with the ideas of composition, formal shape, with all these sort of layered forms. And it was a very intuitive painting, and I just kept layering and to see where we went with it. This was based on some creek paintings too, and also some memories of my grandmother's name was Pearl. And when I was a little kid, she would take me down to the creek and we'd go clam hunting. And she would tell me that sometimes you could find pearls in the clams, and that seemed very magical to me. And it seemed like a very magical place to me. And I think that those sort of romantic ideas about the landscape for me personally came into play with those memories with my grandmother of that place. But it was a little bit dark and mysterious and shady down there, but it was this kind of adventure. And I always have fond memories of that. This is another piece that I did, another triptych from that series called Doppelganger. The sort of surface that you see is silver metallic paint, which doesn't really come across as well in the photograph. But again, it was landscape pictures that has this kind of very topographical feel. And I wanted to layer this very, as opaque as I could get it, silvery flash paint on the top with these other shapes that I altered and changed through projection as I guess almost like a mask in a way, a veil on the top of the landscape. I guess the metallic paints to me at that time sort of represented this kind of really artificial feel. And it had this kind of opacity, and it reflects back at you. And certain lights, it may be kind of difficult to look at because of the sheen. It certainly was difficult to photograph. But I wanted something that, you know, always sort of like mirrors the image back at you and makes you have that feeling that you're in the presence of a painting and a presence of something else at a very sort of like, you know, personal level in your space. I wanted to sort of like cut off that feeling of escapism, I guess, with the landscape work, that you couldn't just go into the image and imagine that you're out there in the landscape doing whatever, that it's always right here with you all the time. I called it Doppelganger just because a doppelganger is, if you've ever read literature about the idea of, it's almost like an evil twin, or like if you were to see your, you know, in wives' tales, you were to see your reflection in the mirror, you were going to die or something, you know. But it's a little bit sinister, but it was about that idea of just something that doesn't seem real, but it's maybe a portent for something. here was actually one of the prints that I created in Germany during my residency at Ryne. It's the Print Association in Bentlage, Ryne. A really pretty area. It was made possible through that Jerome Foundation fellowship that I got in 2017. And so we had the opportunity to go to, it was actually kind of a rural setting. It was really close to cities like Berlin, so it was easy to get there to go visit those places. But it was, the setting itself was nice and rural, and we had the opportunity to create prints. The main printmaking method was screen printing, which I hadn't had a lot of experience with before this. So it was a bit of a learning experience. I tried to incorporate some of those ideas with the photographs again. And this was a photograph that I had taken of the creek from my home again, that we printed out actually digitally on a digital printer on the piece of paper that I was also going to put the screen print on top of. Wow. And so this particular piece, when I printed it through the digital printer, I was able to, through Photoshop, alter the color the way I wanted it and, crop the image. And then when I took it back to the screen printing studio, I incorporated a plat. You can barely see it. It's in metallic gold ink on the top of the image. That was actually a plat of the county in which I grew up in. And I tried to get the farms, and this was like from, I believe, around 1900 when this plat was created that we still had at home. And it was really cool because it shows you all of the names of the farmers, that bought their little squares of land in a grid pattern. And I thought as a pattern, it was interesting, but it was just kind of this kind of interesting historical thing to me as well. And so those were very challenging but fun prints to make there in the residency. And I did different versions of based on that idea. This piece, Synchronicity, is kind of a transitional piece now into the latest series that I'm doing. Again, I incorporated some of those photography images through projecting onto the canvas. This is another very tall canvas. But then I started to think about, the ideas I was working with. And after doing the Altscape series, I was feeling a little bit tired and feeling, that, maybe I wanted to move on a little bit and transform what I was doing. So I decided to become a little bit more introspective about the idea of how I thought about nature and the idea of experience. And that's always been really important to me, that sort of experience of place, sort of from a phenomenology perspective. And I think through, as a painter, I want to sort of be in that painting and feel like I'm in that process, right, as a whole. Right. And so, this piece, I thought, I don't have to use so-called natural colors, I'm always been interested in modern colors anyway, but I just wanted to go pink, and just do something like completely obnoxious and just, play with it. And then I also started using interference paint, which is through golden paints. It has mica flakes in it. So from different perspectives of lighting, the colors will actually change. And so you can have, orange interference paint, and from a different direction, it looks sort of greenish. So it has those effects. In this photograph, a lot of those sort of bluish, clear, orby shapes, they look very blue in the photograph, but from another perspective, they look green or they look orangey. So it kind of changes when you see it in real life. And I like that idea of something that is a bit experiential when you look at the work, and it's not totally static, And you may notice that in the pieces I've been showing so far, here's a detail of it, I incorporated some silver Sharpie to create some grids and just lots of different layers and things going on to kind of create this constant kind of movement in the piece. And then with the moving on to the new series of work, you know, whenever you start something new, it's always a bit scary because you're going to do something else and it's like, where do I want to go with this? But I think that the ideas of sort of the you know, the nature of the mind and sort of metaphysical ideas, and that incorporated you know, different myths and mystical ideas sort of came into play, which is not, you know, uncommon from the history of like landscape painting, the idea of transcendentalism in landscape and the spiritual in art. And some of those things that I had been interested in ever since I was an undergrad, I felt like I wanted to really explore some of those ideas again in my work. And I always loved mazes and labyrinths. And I thought I really wanted to try to incorporate some of those things in the new work. I love pattern painting. And as I said before, optical art. And this piece was one of the first pieces that I created that was completely different when I started it. And so it has lots and lots of layers. And I came back to the idea of that sort of metallic gold underneath this overlay of the labyrinth kind of patterny shape on the top that has this kind of indefinite composition. So it doesn't have necessarily a central focal point. And then this one, Ariadne's thread, again, from that series based on the Greek myth of Ariadne. And that the idea of a journey through something that's a bit of like a maze. It's based on the idea, if you know the story, of her journey into the maze. And I'm not going to go into the whole Greek myth, you can look it up, but and then also this was an experiment into some different techniques in my painting. I started becoming really interested in really improvising with the paint in the sense that I wanted to try splattering the paint and creating shapes and then refining those shapes based on what I was looking at in that moment. And then also more drawing, intuitive drawing over the top, less projecting of images and drawing because I had done so much of that in the other series. And I kind of wanted to get away from that a little bit and just coming back to just basic right there drawing directly on the piece. This one, Plane of Imminence, is also based on that idea of patterns coming together. What is Plane of Imminence is actually from a philosopher, if I can say his name right, he's French, Gilles Deleuze. And he was, and I'm not a philosophy person, so don't ask me specifics about philosophy, but sometimes I come across these ideas and I'm like, oh my gosh, that totally makes sense. When I was working on this piece, the word imminence came into my head and I was like, why am I thinking of this word? So I had to look it up and I came across his idea. It's about materiality, non-materiality, the idea of, you know, experience of being. And so it's related to some of those concepts, but we can talk about that later. But it was just, again, a very layered painting, sort of a tedious painting in terms of deciding what parts of the pattern would be forward and what would go away. So it's constantly, again, kind of no central focal point, and kind of keeping the eye moving around the canvas. This one is actually the same size as that other piece previous. I called it Apocalypse, and sometimes people think of just the popular definition of apocalypse, like the end of the world. And I was actually basing the idea on a new beginning. So apocalypse can mean sort of the ending of something else and the beginning of something new. And I was working on this piece, of course, during the Trump administration. and all the stuff going on with that, and feeling like, you know, we need a new beginning. We need, you know, to find a new way. And during COVID, and maybe feeling a little bit depressed about everything, and trying to sort of uplift myself in a way, finding something that, you know, that there's a way forward. Not to mention that I was starting this new series and thinking, where do I want to go? It just feels like everything around us, as well as personally, was like finding those new beginnings. And this piece, I decided to make sort of a dramatic focal point in this one, because I hadn't been doing that with some of the other pieces. And the shapes are purely intuitive. Again, I did a lot of splattering to create the little kind of round shapes, and then I decided to pinpoint certain ones to create more of you know, light and shadow effects, to create little spheres that look like sort of little organic, something organic and alive going on within the pattern. Another one from this series, current series, Vortex Pedal. This title had been kind of like sitting in my head forever because the idea of a vortex, I think, was, you know, that feeling of kind of like overwhelming emotion that we've all been going through with COVID and our culture as of late, and maybe related to the environment stuff a little bit too, just seemed really relevant. And I felt like, to me, that there was like maybe this moment that we're in is different somehow, and it felt really intense. So I felt like this painting was kind of reflecting that for me a little bit. Again, I used a variety of materials. I actually, for this one, I created some stencils with this to kind of create the shapes. And the shapes were all in there, drawn through the stencils. And then I incorporated pouring paint, some more of that interference paint, and then just played around with this breakdown of that shape. And so everything kind of weaves together in the painting. And a lot of these later pieces are smaller pieces than what I had been doing before, because I just wanted to really be able to work on multiple things at the same time and be able to go back and forth more quickly between pieces. And so a lot of my pieces kind of look a little different, but they're all related. I feel like they're sort of generative in a way where there's relationships between them, but I sort of kept them as individuals so that I could bring out something different and try different techniques with the different pieces. This one, Ghost Eye, was meant to be kind of a little bit dark, a little mysterious. I really wanted to try to do some ideas with veiling, you know, creating layers of veiling and unveiling. And so some of the little smaller shapes I wanted to bring forward and things would go back. Has a bit of a spacey feel, I guess, with it, but that idea of kind of mystery has always been really appealing to me too in pieces, and creating something that maybe that idea of enigmatic, you know, it's like, well, it doesn't really have a clear definition as to what it is, but there's something there that might bring you back and want you to hold your attention. This piece, Enfolding Eye, was the first piece from the series and the last piece so far that I've been able to finish. I started this one at the very beginning after Synchronicity, because I still wanted to do something with a really bold pattern that was very central, and with really bold color. I was incorporating those techniques of splattering paint to create these intuitive shapes that I couldn't really control, that would sort of be a foil to the geometric pattern. And again, there's interference paint mixed in there. So depending on what angle you're at, the color looks different. So again, this piece was really difficult to photograph because of that, and also because of the size, it's 5 feet by 5 feet. So that always makes a challenge for photographing paintings and getting the color true. But so some of these ideas I probably will incorporate in future works too, but it's always an evolution with the process. And that's my big takeaway, I guess, at this point is that I have these concepts in my work that sort of are background or a backstory in my work, and they inform my work. But I really do love the process of painting and discovering the compositions and the imagery through the process as well. So I will leave it there, and thank you very much for looking at my images and listening to me talk, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. As I'm looking at the pieces over the the trajectory that you have, and I see the evolution of the pieces, I'm really struck by the fact that you went from a very kind of more loose style, and then I'm looking at this piece and it's tighter.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering where that's coming from. It's like, is that a part of us going through this pandemic and wanting to find some control in our life? Can you say something to that?
Yeah, I think for me, more than anything, and I think before this talk, we've talked about the idea of when I said, I was really interested in representation, when I was younger, and that was a big part of me getting into art and wanting to be an artist. I mean, since I was a little kid, I knew at 5 years old that I was going to be an artist. That was my thing, but, and my way into it was through drawing. And I happened to be pretty good at it. And I got a lot of praise for it because I could draw pretty representationally, realistically. So I got a lot of praise for that. And in that way that I made images at that point. And I think that's always still a part of me, is enjoying, coming back and enjoying modeling forms and creating things with light and shade and the illusion of space and form. So I think there probably will always be that tension in my work between the more abstract, loose stuff and the more tighter, tightly drawn kind of representational way of making images. I think when I make images, I'm trying to challenge myself and not do things the same way. And part of it, I think, is I get kind of bored with myself. I get bored easily. So I always feel like I want to throw a wrench in things a little bit and try things differently and see what happens, and try not to be afraid if it doesn't turn out. I have lots of stuff that hasn't turned out, and it just sits there or it gets thrown away. So, it's just, I feel like it's almost rare for something to kind of work in a way, and it's a bit of luck and happenstance if I feel like it's something that works. But yeah, I just have to say, I think that I don't really think in terms of style with my work. There may be certain things that I come back to a lot, like pattern. I love pattern, and I love experimenting with color, and maybe certain kinds of shapes I revisit quite a bit. But I don't try to create work in a certain style for any sort of reason, because I feel like it would be kind of boring for me to do that.
So I have another question, and I'm sure other people will have questions. Oh, Rosalie, do you have a comment?
Hi, Annie, can you stop sharing?
I have both a comment and a question.
Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stop sharing, and then everyone, can have the.
I am particularly impressed with what you've done in terms of your spatial concepts. I always have been fascinated with the concept of the space in terms of the abstract expressionists, where I'm sure you're well informed in what you're doing with your work now, as well as with Frank Stella. He was on to something, and you are seemingly picking that up. When you mention layering and you mention the extension beyond the frame, I'm very particularly interested in that concept and how we move out from that and into that at the same time. And you do a wonderful job with that. And I want to know, in terms of where you're going with all of this. I mean, yeah, we can get into myth, we can get into all of that you spoke about. And I like the fact that you're using these academic terms. I think there's, once again, you have been able to integrate, but you integrate beautifully. And so if you could speak a little bit about that, I would be very interested in what you have to say.
Well, those, the concepts with abstract expressionism, I think was a big influence for me as well. When I was an undergrad, one of my professors was very influential that way. But I had, professors that were very much into representational work too. So I had like everything, but yes, that stuff really spoke to me. I would say an artist that was pretty seminal to me was actually Jasper Johns when I was a young person in my 20s. And I think some of his ideas and ways of thinking about making paintings and prints and how he incorporated concepts with his media was really influential to me. And to this day, I still think a lot about how he thought about making his painting. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that with painting today, there's so many things you can do. You can do anything you want to do, basically. But I think what I'm interested in, and I probably will always be, is sort of like poetic narrative. You might be able to relate to this, Rosalie, but I enjoy narrative in work, but I like it on a very sort of abstract level. And so it sort of intimates at something, it doesn't give you the whole story. And I think through titling work, I like to reference things that I'm thinking about while I'm making the work and things that I'm reading about. And it's also for sort of in a way like a bookmark for me to think about where I'm going with my work while I'm making this piece and I'm reading about something, thinking about something, where I want to move with the work. And so it's hard for me to say exactly where I'm going with my work in the future. I think this series with liminal realities and enigmatic constructs is a nice kind of open book, open-ended series for me that I feel like I can live in for a while, because it could be lots of things, and it provides a way for me to do basically anything I want with the imagery. And I'm sure it will be related, but it allows me to evolve the work and think about work through more of an abstract language.
Thank you. I have another comment from one of our guests in the audience. Her name is Hung Yi Lang. And I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She makes this comment, and here's what she's saying. I would like to know some more about your thinking process when you created your paintings. Liminality is a term first developed in anthropology. Then it was expanded to more general usage. Number one, when you use this term, are you talking about personal perception, psychological process, or being, or something else? Number two, in the liminal stage between the seen and unseen, are you dealing with a certain time frame? How did you see it? Chronological, from past to present? The present reflects the past, or parallel existences? What is the relationship between seen and unseen? What kind of dynamic energy did you want to capture in your painting to demonstrate this relationship between,
Mhm.
I'm adding the seen and the unseen?
Well, thank you for that question. It's very complex. But I will say the idea for the title of liminal realities, when I was looking and thinking about the word liminality, liminal, I meant in sort of the sense of being on the threshold of something. So where you're kind of in an in-between state of being here and there, and maybe with our understanding of how we perceive things, think about things in our reality where we are now, things how we from what we're influenced by in terms of reading experience, how that influences where we are now and where we want to be in the future. It's also about when I connected realities to it, I was thinking about the idea of perception and how, you know, and we can see that today, even culturally, how people's perceptions of things can change their actions, what they're willing to do or not to do. But I think we kind of do that all the time, like, especially as artists, when we create imagery and think about things, we're sort of creating our own worlds, you know, and just being at that point of creation, in that process of creation. I forgot what the other last part of the question was, but maybe you could repeat that for me, the last.
Well, she talked about what kind of dynamic energy did you want to capture in your painting to demonstrate this relationship, and the relationship is about between the seen and the unseen.
Well, I think that, and this is something I've been playing with for a while with the layering, is creating these kind of veils in the work. So I'm really interested in images that aren't really static, that have this kind of feeling of movement, of you know, front to back. You mean like there's a traditional push-pull thing in painting, but I feel like there's this another element of sort of being kind of in the painting in a way, you know, and especially with the larger work, I enjoyed that feeling of like it was kind of in your space and taking up your space. And I guess I think about, you know, the famous water lily installation of Monet's, you know, where it's in the whole room and you sort of feel like you're enveloped by this imagery. And I always love that sort of feeling, even though I can probably never create a piece that's quite that large, but, you know, just even on a small scale, how can we create that feeling of like really being engaged in the image somehow? And so it's been just like an experimental process of, you know, creating depth mixed with the very flatness of painting and especially acrylic paint. You know, it's kind of a challenge, and not a traditional, you know, 1 point or 2 point perspective way, you know. So that's a hard question because that's something I'm still really kind of discovering for myself as I work on these pieces. But that's what makes it interesting, I guess, for me. So.
Anne,
Yeah.
hi, Anne. I was wondering what the dates were when you went from one series to another. Did this reflect what's happening in your life around the world with COVID? I can't quite put my finger on when that transition happened.
Right.
But I mean, it's such a it's such a deep reaction to something that you made this switch, and I just like you to help us a little bit to understand that. I feel it in the work.
Thank you.
And with your also with your titles. Your titles are a wonderful bridge for people to help follow your thinking.
Mhm.
At any rate, I'd like to go back a little bit in your history of when that change happened in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I think I've always been a bit of an existentialist, which is probably why I liked abstract expressionism to begin with, because there was that kind of element in their work. But I think around, when I had that kind of transition between 2018, 2019, and I was sort of ending that Altscape series because I'd worked so intensely on that. It was just a lot of work working on those large pieces. And I felt like I needed that change, and I just wanted to kind of go back to maybe some other things that I had been interested in for a long time. The idea about, I've always been interested in myth and mysticism and the spiritual in art and a lot of those things. And I thought, I'm just going to do it and go back and take a chance and just explore some of those ideas more in the new work, just to kind of take a little path, maybe a little break in a way into something else. Even though I still very much have those concerns that I did in the other work, I just wanted to change it up a little bit. And in terms of, the thanks, about the titles, I mean, that's one thing that, like I said before, I just really, I love stories, and that paintings can be something more and maybe be sort of an impetus to discussion in a way, beyond the expectation that I've often been presented it with as painting as sort of just a decorative thing, like it can be more than that, and I enjoy that aspect of being an artist and making images and playing with what an image can be and sort of the density of an image as a concept. So I think that's where that comes from. But,
Really
Beautiful, thank you.
yeah.
Lynette, do you have any comments to offer?
Well, I did. I think it's very interesting that initially your paintings were about your environment and where you grew up in very geology and geographical, and they were very fluid. And you used the same process later, but they became very mechanical. I think of machinery and also outer space, intergalaxy or exploratory. They can also be, though, like I've seen some, cellular or microscope photos. And so the dynamic between outer space and inner space reflected some of your titles too, that exploratory. It gets to the mysticism. It's beyond our daily life, it's the mystery inside and the mystery in outer space. And I just found it very interesting that you went to a real mechanical look, or at least that dominated. Yes, you had your splatter pieces. And they're really dramatic and really fun. They almost remind me of a Ferris wheel or something, you get, it's just the mechanical aspect. I really don't have a question because I think your process is a lot like mine. I don't know where I'm going, and I just start out and take a path, and it's very iterative and very intuitive, and it's fun. It's a journey, and then you get somewhere and you stop when you like what you see.
Yeah.
And only when you look back do you go, oh, that's where I went, or why did I go that way? And you start to reflect and think about it.
Right.
It's very exciting, though, because of all the experimenting you do. And you've given me great ideas of things to try myself. So thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Looks like you're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but you still, the fun element is coming through, I think. The joy.
I think that's a big part of the process. And I think keeping it interesting and just changing it up is, I mean, I'm trying to, like, how sometimes you feel like I got to stick to this for a while so I can actually complete this thought, complete this piece, because you're always thinking ahead, of something else. But it is fun to experiment and try things, because I think trying to critique a series of work at the beginning of the series is really hard to do. And I think I'm just kind of like right in the middle of it right now. It hasn't been that much time that I've been working on this new stuff. And so I've been trying to work quickly. The winter was horrible trying to get anything done because we had a new puppy and it was crazy. But
Daily life.
yeah. But just trying to get back into that kind of daily grind stuff where you just keep working on things, and then later, like you said, you can reflect on it, and just see where you're at, and what's kind of come to the surface in a way, and what's been the most meaningful way to make the work, as well as the most meaningful ideas about the work. And so that's in process. So
I have
Go ahead, Rosalie.
very brief. I know we're running over time, but the discussion, is a very important one. You are on the cusp of something, is what I'm feeling in terms of what you're doing spatially and conceptually. Your work is within the conceptual realm, which is very exciting to me. Everybody is going to have their own perspective on it. When you're talking about layers, you're talking about mirrors, you're talking about shifting visions, you're talking about spatial integration. These are huge topics which are extremely exciting today as we explore the world, as we explore beyond, the world. And in that way, you've taken us, through this journey as you situated your earlier work within environmental direct references, and then you lift it out and you take us both in and out of this cosmic spatial reality. So, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalie, for that
Yeah.
comment.
Beautiful.
Fascinating.
Thank
Yes.
Great.
Does Anne have something to say about that?
Well, yes. I mean, that idea of, even Lynette pointed that out too, the microcosm, macrocosm relationship is something, yes, I do think about. I think it's one of those elemental things of nature, of being, of us being part of the universe and beyond. Both the external universe and the internal universe, the universe that we think of as reality, and that in which we imagine or fantasize about. I think those things I do think about a lot. And so that relationship in the abstract composition of something that can be the smallest thing can be just as important as the larger composition, and how those things relate to each other are really important to me. And I think so, like, the patterns act that way. They act as both details in the piece as well as the overall structure of the piece. And I think that's why I keep coming back to that at this point. So yeah, I mean, I think of those big ideas. It's kind of hard to always incorporate those big ideas in a visual language. And I think that's part of the challenge too, but those are things that interest me. I do love science. I do love, the NASA channel and stuff like that. So, I'm kind of a nerd that way. I'm interested in physics and things, even though I'm not a physicist. I just have general interest in some of those things. So.
Great, thank you.
I have a short comment. Earlier in your presentation, I think it was with your altscapes, you made a comment about these dramatic paintings that you couldn't escape from. And I loved that line. And I think it applies to all of your work. Because as a viewer, I can't escape from it. So I can only imagine you as the creator being enveloped in that process, as well as how it's coming back to you, how it talks to you.
Yeah, I feel like there's very much that, to me, as an artist, art has been, in creating images, has always been really important to me. I always, people are always telling me to lighten up, but you know, it's something I obsess about, and I really enjoy being in that process. And I feel like it's not just about creating a product, I guess, you know, I feel like it's a part of my life and who I am and part of my expression as a person. And so I guess I want other people to feel that, maybe feel that intensity that I feel when I'm making the work too.
It comes across. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're coming to an end, and I just want to thank our panelists, Rosalie and Meng and Lynette and Laurel, for your comments and contribution. I also want to recognize Hung Yi Lan, who attempted to make a comment, and very interesting, you know, question that she had. It's almost like I want to copy and paste it and look at it again and again. So thank you, Hung Lee. And I wanted to say thank you all for being here today. And we have a global organization which involves a lot of people who join us sometimes that we can't see here in this room. And today we happen to have a panel and a group of us that are more Minnesota based, and which was very lovely, even if we're not in Minnesota, all of the people that are on. But next month we will welcome Loy she is from China. I think she's based out of New York at this time. But we're very excited about the people who are participating globally and trying to hear all the voices. So thank you very much for being with us. And thank you so much to Anne Rynearson, who is quite an inspiration for the rest of us.